Vikir observed Seth quietly. Everything about him matched the memories from his previous life. The gestures, the posture, the way he carried conversation. It was the same person Vikir had known. Seth asked about his work in Underdog, mentioning how Vikir had handled the magistrate's duties as deputy in Seth's absence. He added that he heard the residents even protested to make Vikir's position permanent. He said it would be good if they worked together again someday. Vikir answered that he looked forward to it and lifted his wine glass. Seth mirrored the gesture. The glasses tapped lightly. Vikir looked down at the surface of his drink. Light reflected cleanly across it. His gaze shifted towards Seth's side of the table. Only the chair appeared in the wine's surface. Seth did not. The conclusion came immediately. The real Seth was already gone. Something else was wearing his body. Vikir considered warning the others, but there were too many eyes and no proof. Acting now would only create disorder. He let the thought pass. He would gather more evidence first. Seth spoke again, asking which night order Vikir found interesting. He mentioned he had always liked the Dobermans when he was young because of their uniform. Osiris told him to stop and let Vikir eat. Hugo checked on him, asking if he was enjoying the meal. Vikir replied that it was delicious. Hugo nodded and told him to come to his office once he was settled. Vikir replied with a quiet nod, saying, "Of course." Vikir left the dining room and made his way back to his room. He crossed the courtyard in silence, wondering why the dinner had needed to continue for 5 hours. The thought drifted toward Hugo. The new year would begin soon. It was possible Hugo wanted to speak with him about the academy. As the idea formed, someone stood on the roof behind him, waiting. An attack came from afar, the sixth form cutting through the air toward him. Vikir sensed it immediately. He considered answering with his full strength, but that would reveal too much. Instead, he chose to struggle on purpose, meeting the strike with the fourth form and barely holding it back. He defended the attack without difficulty, masking the truth beneath controlled effort. When he looked up, the man on the roof grinned down at him. Boston Terrier watched him with amusement. He dropped from the roof into the courtyard and remarked that his nephew had grown. Then he declared he had an eye for talent and called out to Dane. Dane stepped forward from behind Vikir and moved toward Boston Terrier, demanding to know why he had drawn his sword inside the Baskerville residence. He said the attack could have killed Vikir, and if Hugo learned of it, Boston would be confined for months. Boston Terrier smiled and said he had no harmful intent toward his nephew. His attacks had been controlled and would not have hurt him. The two continued bickering while Vikir turned away and walked off, thinking what a nuisance his uncles were. As he left, he noted how unimpressive the attack had been. He had already reached the level of the 7 counts, perhaps even surpassed them when considering Beelzebub and the power of the sticks. He had also reached the 7th form. He walked on, thinking he could handle one of the counts with ease, possibly 2. As Vikir continued through the estate, he came across another nuisance. The triplets stood waiting for him ahead. They drew their swords in unison, and Vikir sighed. These dogs still didn't understand their place. Then the 3 of them knelt, lowering the points of their swords to their feet. Vikir recognized the posture, a pledge, a gesture of entrusting their lives to a master. He asked what they thought they were doing. They explained that they wished to repay him for saving their lives 2 years ago. One said they had feared him when they were 9 after losing to him. Another said defeating the Cerberus had earned their approval. The third added that the troll incident had strengthened it. They continued. When they saw him fight that massive creature 2 years ago, they saw his power and felt reverence and awe. They survived because of him, and now they wished to become his trident from this day on. They told him they were born to be hunting dogs and chose him as their master until the day they died. Vikir recalled how efficient they had been in his past life. They had hunted him at Hugo's command when he was framed. He held no resentment. They had followed orders. But he had not forgotten. He walked past them. The triplets lowered their heads, assuming he had rejected them. Vikir told them he did not need their pledge, but they could speak another time. He added that any connection they had with him, now or later, was not to be disclosed. Everything that happened tonight and in the future would remain between them alone. The triplets stood with brightened expressions and answered that they would obey. Vikir continued walking. He needed to contact Cindy Wendy to investigate Seth. That demon would be eliminated soon. But there was something else he had to take care of first. Vikir made his way to Hugo's office. Hugo informed him that he would be enrolling at the academy this year. He handed him the invitation. Vikir read it, thinking it was exactly as he expected. He remembered the academy from his past life, but only as a valet for the triplets. He had never had an easy time with the nobles back then because of his position and the scars on his face. He pushed the memory aside. None of it mattered now. Hugo asked if he still wished to be accompanied by the triplets, as they had agreed 2 years ago. Vikir said there was something he wanted to ask before they discussed that matter. He told Hugo he had heard he was supposed to receive a reward for the events with the Morgs 2 years ago. Hugo confirmed it and asked if there was something he wanted. Vikir asked if his reward could be a conversation with him. Hugo asked what kind of conversation. He wished to know more about Lady Roxana and Miss Penelope. Barrymore, standing behind Hugo, froze in shock at the request. Hugo's expression went cold. He asked Vikir to repeat himself. Vikir's eyes did not waver as he repeated the question. Hugo slammed the desk, demanding to know how he learned those names and why he wanted to know about them. Vikir drew a quiet breath, saying he could only answer after hearing more about them. He added that he was not trying to pry and had a valid reason to ask. While he waited for Hugo's response, Vikir considered the weight of what he was asking. He needed to know how deeply Hugo had loved them before he could risk speaking of Pomeranian. He still did not know whether Barrymore's account had been true. After a pause, Hugo lowered his head. He spoke of his late wife Roxana, the love of his life, and of Penelope, the apple of his eye. His hand rested over his heart as he said it. Vikir had not expected this from Hugo. He had not known Hugo could show emotions of this kind. Hugo explained that his marriage to Roxana had not been arranged, despite what others might believe. She had been a commoner. It had been love at first sight. The Baskerville family had opposed the union, but he had run away with her regardless. They had been tracked down. Hugo had protected her with his life, killing every assassin sent after them. In the end, the family had relented and allowed the marriage. Penelope was born soon after, but Roxana fell ill later and eventually passed away. Penelope grew up as a bright, cheerful girl, carrying her mother's kind heart and becoming beloved by all Baskervilles. As Hugo reached the next part, the room tightened with pressure. Rage bled out of him. He seethed as he told Vikir that he had never known how they managed to infiltrate so deeply into Baskerville territory. He had searched for her ever since, but had found no trace. Vikir listened. The reason behind the territorial expansion of the empire became clear. Hugo wanted an excuse to search the woodlands. This was why he had raised an army of hounds. The iron-blooded swords of Baskerville had been born from this single moment. Outwardly, Hugo had always seemed cold and ruthless. Now, Vikir understood, he had merely been a man carrying the pain of losing his family. Vikir forced the thought aside. Every villain had a story. It did not erase what Hugo had done. Hugo eventually settled, though his stare remained fixed on Vikir. He asked him to explain why he wanted to know that story now that he had heard it. Vikir reached into his pocket and took out a locket. He placed it on Hugo's desk and told him to look. Hugo recognized it instantly. It was the locket he had made for Roxana. He said the last time he had seen it, it had been around Penelope's neck. He opened it and saw the family portrait inside, his expression tightening with emotion. Vikir asked him what he would do if Penelope had a child, speaking as he moved toward the door. Hugo looked confused and asked what he meant. Vikir placed his hand on the door and told him that Penelope had a child. When he opened it, a girl stepped into the room. Vikir said she was his granddaughter. He said he had lied earlier because he had not known how Hugo would react. Then he told him he had found her in the Rococo tribe's village, and that she had said the one who gave her the locket was her mother. Hugo asked if she had truly called Penelope her mother, looking down at the portrait inside the locket. Vikir watched him carefully. Now he would see the man fall apart at the news of a girl born from the one he cherished most and the one he despised beyond all others. Hugo rose and approached the child, his expression unreadable. He stared at her and asked again if Vikir had really found her in the Rococo village. Pomeranian shrank back in fear. Then he seethed, asking if this girl had been born from Penelope and a barbarian. Vikir confirmed it as Hugo visibly trembled with anger. Hugo reached his hand toward Pomeranian. Vikir watched closely. This was where his revenge began. The next day, Vikir stood beside Barrymore and Osiris, unable to believe what he was seeing. Hugo was playing with Pomeranian. He was smiling, laughing. Osiris said he had not lived a long life, but this was the most astonishing thing he had ever witnessed. Barrymore added that he had lived a long life and agreed with him. Vikir watched in silence. This was not the outcome he had expected. Hugo cried tears of happiness, saying he could not believe he was a grandfather. Vikir tried to contain the anger rising inside him. Why was he happy, he wondered. All his life, he had thought about how to kill Hugo, yet he had always known it was impossible. Then he had found Pomeranian. He had believed that once Hugo saw her, his mind would break, and an opening would finally appear. He glared at Hugo. Why was he so happy? Barrymore turned to him and thanked him. He said he had never known Hugo could smile like that. He said it felt like a dream. Vikir watched as his hand trembled with anger, only for the feeling to fade moments later. Hugo was completely vulnerable now. Yet Vikir felt nothing but helplessness. Later that evening, Vikir lay in bed, thinking about everything that had happened. He remembered the Hugo from his past life, the cold man who had accused him of feeding children to demons and executed him without hesitation. He wondered why he had hesitated earlier when he finally had an opening. A sudden voice broke through his thoughts, asking why he looked so glum. Vikir turned his head to see Cindy Wendy climbing through his window. He asked what she was doing there. She told him she had brought what he asked for. She tossed a file onto his face, saying it contained information on Seth Baskerville. She asked again why he looked so depressed, then said she didn't want to know. Claiming she was a busy woman, she told him Seth had been donating to several orphanages under a false name and had also overseen the adoption of children. After each adoption, all information on both the adopters and the children disappeared. She said that if he really was a demon, as Vikir suspected, this could be a serious problem. Then she hesitated and nervously asked if the children were being sacrificed. Vikir studied the documents, wondering if the missing children from Underdog were connected to Seth as well. Then something clicked. If the current Seth was a demon, then the Seth he had known in his past life had likely been a demon too. When he had been imprisoned, it had been Seth who came to him, telling him Hugo was using him as a scapegoat for the missing children. Seth had pretended to sympathize with him as he informed him of the execution order. Vikir's expression twisted with anger as he realized the truth. It had been Seth who framed him all along. Far out in the wilderness, a man led a child through the dark terrain. The child asked where they were going. The man told him it was where he would be living from now on. The child looked up nervously, saying he thought he was supposed to go to a nice place, then stared ahead in confusion. It was a cave. Seth looked down at the boy and said he had misunderstood. The cave was not his home. As he spoke, the skin on his face began to crack. A monstrous mouth opened across his head, and a demonic voice told the boy it would show him where he was truly going. He devoured him whole. Seth's face returned to its human shape. He smiled, saying children really were delicious. Saliva gathered at the corner of his mouth as he covered one eye, muttering that he simply could not stop eating them. He sat on a stone throne and spoke with another demon communicating through a crow-like creature perched nearby. He said he might start breeding humans like livestock to satisfy his hunger. He asked the creature what it thought, calling it 8. 8 told him to keep a low profile, that humans must never learn of their existence. It said it was becoming concerned with the number of children Seth had been consuming lately. If he continued, the Baskervilles would grow suspicious. Seth dismissed the warning, saying the cave was protected by a barrier and no one could enter. He looked at 8 and said that at this rate it would take 12 years to open the gate. He needed more blood to gather enough mana, much more. 8 told him they could wait, but they must not attract the attention of humans. After a brief pause, 8 asked if Seth had anything to report on the Baskervilles. Seth said nothing worth mentioning, and that 8 should focus on the morgues instead. 8 reminded him that the goal of the 10 prime corpses was to open the portal to the demon world. Then the creature dissolved into a pool of black fluid and departed, telling him not to forget its warning. When it was gone, Seth scoffed. He could never tell 8 that Hugo had turned into a fool over his granddaughter. To destroy House Baskerville, Hugo needed to remain cold-blooded. Seth needed him to keep using younger Baskervilles as expendable tools so the family would stay weak enough for the demons to annihilate them. He took a slow sip of wine, muttering that he did not like the way things were going. And it was all because of that boy, Vikir van Baskerville. He thought back to when Vikir had still been a baby. Even then he had been a thorn in his side, surviving the 2 vipers Seth had slipped into his cot. He had considered himself fortunate when he heard Vikir was killed in the woodlands. But then the boy had returned, bringing Hugo's granddaughter with him. He bit his thumb in frustration. After years of planning, he was out of options. He would have to remove the problem. Vikir walked the halls with Hugo. He wondered how long Hugo planned to stay silent. He glanced at him, thinking the man had finally lowered his guard. A part of him questioned whether he should take this opportunity to kill him. He sighed quietly. Perhaps he would have thought that before, but things had changed. Hugo suddenly spoke, saying he knew Vikir resented him. Vikir was caught off guard. Had Hugo sensed his hostility? Hugo said he was a bad father, a man who sent his sons out as hunting dogs to die. He said he had always known his sons would despise him deep down. Then he said that even though Vikir had been exceptional since birth, he had still failed him as a father, and he would simply have to bear that hatred. He said he had only himself to blame for using them as tools to enforce his hatred on the barbarians. Vikir could not believe what he was hearing. Hugo would never speak of himself like this. He wondered if the man was testing his loyalty. Then Hugo apologized to him and said he wanted to thank him. He bowed his head and said Pomeranian had told him Penelope spent her final days happy. Knowing his daughter had not suffered a tragic end had eased a part of the anger he had carried for so long. He lowered his head even further, saying all of this had been possible because of Vikir, and he would grant him anything he desired. Vikir thought of the question that had been gnawing at him for some time. After living another life, he had seen things from another perspective. He had changed the course of his own fate and the fates of others, including Hugo's. He wondered whether the man he knew in his previous life and the man bowing before him now were even the same person. The cold-blooded Hugo no longer existed. It was as if he had been reborn, just as Vikir had. But then he reminded himself that his own purpose had always been revenge. Could he truly forgive Hugo? Even if Hugo had not framed him, he had still refused to believe him when he tried to defend himself. Revenge or forgiveness, he did not know which to choose. But there was something he needed to do before any of that. He told Hugo to raise his head. Then he said there was something he needed to ask of him.
Elsewhere, Pomeranian sat in the garden while someone brushed her hair. The person asked if she liked living at the castle. She said yes, because Uncle Vikir and Grampy lived here, and also Uncle Osi. The person asked if she remembered their name as well. She pressed a finger to her lip, thinking for a while, then pointed at them. Uncle Seth, an elderly maid, approached and asked Seth why he was here, saying she thought he had returned to secluded training. He smiled and said he wanted to see his precious niece before he left. The maid told him Lord Hugo had ordered that no one was to come near Pomeranian. Seth said it would be their little secret as he brushed the child's hair again. He commented on how soft it was, saying it reminded him of Penelope's. The maid frowned, confused, saying that made no sense. He had not even been born when Miss Penelope was alive. His voice dropped. He said he had heard that his father was looking for her. As he spoke, a monstrous mouth opened across the back of his head, devouring the maid silently behind Pomeranian. Pomeranian looked back and asked where the maid had gone. Seth told her she had urgent business to attend to. He asked if she liked her grandfather. She nodded brightly, saying of course. Seth thought that Hugo loved her just as he had loved his daughter. Then he wondered, if he killed her here and now, just how much further Hugo would break.